In 1968, I bought an album. Well, I bought a few albums in 1968, but this particular album was called Shades of Deep Purple. And there was a track on there which was the Beatles track, Help, which I thought was a bit strange for a rock group to do until I heard it. And the organ playing on it was the most amazing that I'd ever heard, with all the sounds and bits and pieces that came with it. And that inspired me to really look for this particular man. But even though I've got to know him since then, it's taken 68, 30, 40, 41 years before I'm actually sitting opposite him in face-to-face. Jon Lord, welcome, sir.
Thank you, Rick. God bless you.
Do you remember that album?
I do. I remember it with great love and affection. It was... because what it was Deep Purple had been almost stuffed together quite quickly. Because I'd met Richie, and we had this sudden desire to put a band together. And we'd found a guy, you know, remember those wonderful people that you sometimes found in those days who had money and wanted to be the next Brian Epstein or something, you know? Well, we'd found one of those. And before he changed his mind, we thought we'd better get a band together fairly quick. And I think what he wanted, I think he wanted a pop band. But so we were a little careful of his sensibilities, you know, but we knew that that's not what we were going to be. But we'd gone into a rehearsal situation, come up with a few ideas of how to do a few things, and very quickly gone into the studio.
It was you and Ian initially who formed it, wasn't it?
It was me and Richie and I started the band.
Oh, it was you and Richie?
Sorry, yeah, okay. Then Pacey came along. Actually, Pacey came along as a mate of the guy who got the job of singing, Rod Evans.
Rod Evans, yeah. Who ended up in America, didn't he, Rod?
Yes, yeah. And disappeared. No one knows where he is now. I mean, he's just gone off into the... Maybe he's the Bigfoot. Maybe that's him.
Because he only did the one album, didn't he, Rod?
The first three.
The first three.
The first three.
And Nick Simper, that was the other part of the original.
That's right. Yeah, I'd met Nick when I was in the backing band of the Flower Pot Men.
Yeah, we'll come on to that later. That's a cracker, that is.
Yes. But yeah, if you insist.
So I mean, Shades of Deep Purple, I still think it's one. I still list it whenever I have to do my favourite 10 albums. I still list it as that because I thought it was light years ahead of its time with what you did.
Thank you. I'd sort of come. I think what the lucky accident, if you like, with Deep Purple, that first few weeks was that we all had come from very, very different musical start points, if I can put it that way. I'd been playing sort of R&B Hammond with the Artwoods for 3 or 4 years. Richie had been playing this kind of Joe Meek sort of pop, for backing people like Heinz, you know, and working in Joe Meek's studio, doing that sort of thing. And then sauntered off to Germany to find himself or whatever, and ended up translating this love of technique into actually quite a wonderful blend of slight madness, you know, in the way he looked at the guitar. Pacey, his father brought him up listening to Louis Bellson and Gene Krupa and all the big band drummers, you know. So Pacey was a little rocker at heart. I mean, he loved Little Richard. In fact, he could spend 10 minutes telling you how Little Richard's drummer succeeds in getting that effect in Rip It Up. You know, I mean, things like that. I mean, I don't understand him.
No.
He's a drummer.
It's what drummers do, isn't it, really?
They go on about that sort of thing. Bless him. But, you know, so... And then Simper had been with Johnny Kidd and the Pirates. And Rod was kind of a, you know, like a would-be Scott Walker. You know, so there's this mad mixture. But somehow it worked. And... I think we came up with something genuinely different and startlingly different, considering we only had about 3 weeks to write it or to put it together, and we were only in the studio for 2 days to do it.
You were in the studio. That was done in 2 days.
We did it on a Saturday and a Sunday at Pie Studios at Marble Arch.
That's astonishing.
It was. I mean, that was all they could afford for us to, you know, the studio time that could be afforded for it.
But of course you had the Hush was the first. Was that the first single, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And just an instant.
Well, again, that was Nick Simper had said when we started rehearsing, and said, "What should we do?" you know, that to do Help, as you mentioned earlier, to do it slowly.
Yeah.
That was my idea, but because I just thought it was a great song, which
Yeah.
you can't really criticise the Beatles. I know it's heresy, but I always thought that Help was a little bit too fast.
Yeah.
I thought there was a better song hiding in there somewhere. Whether we proved that or not, I have no idea. But Hush was, I think, Nick Simper's idea. He'd heard it around the clubs. It was a Joe South song, and a guy called, I think, Billy Joe Royal had recorded it, and it had this slight sort of Bo Diddley-ish samba sort of beat thing going, which we translated into a more rocky thing, and off we went. We did it just because it seemed like fun, but the American record company leapt on it, said it's a hit, and indeed it was.
The thing that I really liked about it was, of course, one of the things that all organists and piano players suffered from around about that period of time in the late 60s is you couldn't be heard. And it was all, I don't even remember the early days when it came to your bit, when you had we all had an organ solo, they'd all go quiet, we have to go quiet, so we can just hear it come through. Right, he's finished that now. Right, here we go, back again. But that's right. But that was the great thing about it. I mean, it was a serious organ-based track, wasn't it?
Yeah, and I think because I was probably the most articulate at the time, you'll have noticed that that's changed. You know, and the most, I suppose I was the most musically sort of savvy, having been trained and all that stuff. I sort of got pushed to the front as the spokesman of the band by the rest, you know, who's going to talk with the band? And they'd all take 2 steps back, leaving me. And so also, musically, I had quite a strong say in the band until Richie really started to you know, stretch his wings and learn how to fly properly, which he most certainly did. So the organ was pushed a bit to the fore, I think, just for that reason. Plus, I'd just got a brand new C3 with a great big honking Leslie and, you know, and the tone cabinet.
Oh, you had both.
And, yeah, you had both, which is a heck of a potent mix.
Yeah.
And courtesy of this man who had money, who wanted a pop band.
And did he manage the band for some time?
Yeah.
Can you mention his name?
Yes, I can. His name was Tony Edwards.
Right.
And he's now way into his 70s, I think, and he's still alive, spends most of his time in Italy. I think he succeeded in doing... I think he got his investment back.
You went to America and did you do Ed Sullivan? You certainly did some television, though, which was quite unheard of.
We didn't do Ed Sullivan. We did Merv Griffin.
Right.
And we did... do you remember one of the Rat Pack called Joey Bishop?
Yes.
Well, he used to have a TV chat show.
Right.
We did his show. We did Hugh Hefner, Playboy After Dark. And there's a great clip, which you can still see, I think it's on YouTube somewhere, of the shot they wanted set up was, oh, Richie, you're going to be teaching Hugh, or Hef, how to play the guitar. Okay, so we want you to show chord and things, you know. So that it's sort of like Playboy After Dark, you know, and the title music, and it hones in on this bouffon-haired Richie, you know, who used to backcomb it into oblivion and cover it in God knows what for it to stay like a sort of a Busby, you know. Doing. And then the immaculately groomed Hefner, you know, with the bow tie, and he's going, yes, well, you see, you put your hand there, and he's going, oh, I see, okay, so, and we played an instrumental during which Rod Evans stood at the front and danced. It's quite exciting, and.
He was quite small, Rod, wasn't he?
Yes, he was a compact, I think is
diminutive.
Is the word you want, yes. And then we played Hush. But live, we actually played them.
Right.
We even appeared on The Dating Game.
You're joking.
No.
Not as contestants.
I had to be one of the contestants. It was the only way they would allow us to, because we were the only band ever to promote its single on The Dating Game. And the reason we were allowed to do it was because the head of the record company, not so much the head, the guy who put all the money into this early record company, was Bill Cosby, the American, the black comedian who had made, at that point, I think, 5 platinum, billion-selling comedy albums and was awash with cash, you know, and decided to start a record company.
So in the dating game, you were a contestant?
Yeah. They said, because he'd gone to them, it was Bill Cosby, you know, and they'd do anything for him. And he said, I want to put this new band of, he called us Redcoats. I want to put this new band of Redcoats on your show. It'll be a coup for us. And they went, but it's a game show. And he said, yeah, but, you know. They said, well, then one of the band has to play
the game.
And they said, who's going to beat? What did they do? The 2 steps back, you know, as before, you know, and left me standing at the front. So I had to play the dating game.
You sort of broke equally in America and England at the same time, didn't you, really?
Because of the...
Because of Hush, right?
Of Hush. But then, very, very quickly, the bounce of Hush, the Hush effect dissipated here in the UK. I mean, people weren't as impressed as we had hoped they would be. Well, certainly journalists weren't, you know. You know, and England was, in those days, way more cool than America, you know, in the sort of way of being, you know, like, you've got a hit single in America? Oh, great, yeah. What's on television? You know, but whereas in America, it's like, yeah, top 5, you know, wow, bang, 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 and all that different kind of way of looking at it. So very quickly, that the effect that the single had dissipated over here. And then it took us another couple of years before we climbed back up.
Yeah, you had some good what I call radio plays. I was speaking, all those things like great tracks and things.
It was all good stuff. It wasn't terribly radio friendly.
Yeah.
But you know, we until we wrote a song called Black Night, which I say wrote it. We sort of half cobbled it together and half stole it. You know, the riff was actually the backing riff to Ricky Nelson's "Summertime," his version of "Summertime."
Oh right, okay.
Because he did it, you know, like as a mid-tempo thing, you know, "Summertime."
Gotcha.
And like that. And the back, and behind it was. No, it didn't do that. It didn't do the
top bit. It didn't do the turnaround.
No, it just went doodle-doo, 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 doodle-doo.
Oh, you added the turnaround at the top.
We added the turnaround, and then Pacey said, "If you stop there, I can do something interesting," which of course is the drum break that every drummer goes, "What does he actually do?"
Yeah,
because he goes right across the beat.
He does, yeah.
And
probably suffers on stage when we say you didn't play that right if he does it slightly differently.
People who know, yes,
yeah.
You know, other drummers. And that's not how you used to do it. Yeah. But that was a couple of years later. That was when we were almost instructed to write a single. Because we'd had In Rock, which we made in '69, when Gillan and Glover joined. And that was a year in the charts, in the album charts. So by sort of 70, we were back on top here. And the record companies, you know, you've got to have a single. We've got to get you on Top of the Pops. You know, and we were going, well, Top of the Pops? No, that's not the kind of band we are. But we succumbed, and that's how we wrote Black Night, after an evening in the pub.
Well, I'm right.
As you do.
Great track.
Yeah.
It is
I mean,
it's a real crowd pleaser, too.
It's a great crowd pleaser, and you can't really go wrong with a shuffle. I mean, it's...
No. On speaking, how did you get that distorted sound on the solo?
I used to play the organ through a Marshall stack. I tapped into the amp actually in the Hammond. I mean, I didn't do it personally. That's not my my area of expertise.
Technically challenged like me.
Yeah. To step back a minute, I mean, the reason I did it was because I was trying to compete with Richie. Richie was a very, what's the word?
Loud?
Well, loud is the word. Yeah, that's the word I was looking for. Thank you. How could I have forgotten that word? I had a senior moment there and forgot the word loud. But he was a lot of notes, you know, or none at all. He hated rhythm playing. So I had to come up with this concept which I named, you know, rhythm organ as opposed to rhythm guitar.
Yeah.
And I needed something more attacking. And I just, one day, you know, the little light bulb above the head.
Yeah.
I wonder if I was to go through a Marshall stack as well. And he had a spare one. So I said to this guy who worked for us by this time, do you know how to tap into an amplifier in the back of a Hammond? He said, I'm sure it can be done. And after nearly blowing himself up a couple of times, you know, he succeeded. Yeah. Boy, I mean, an animal was unleashed. I mean, the sound was...
Fabulous sound.
But very difficult. I mean, I don't have to tell you that the challenge in the difference between a piano technique and an organ technique. I mean, it's
chalk and cheese.
And it's different. It's difficult enough as it is if you want any sort of legato or smoothness of any kind. But this kind of made it even worse. I mean, every slight miss of a note, or you know, which would, instead of being a little grace note, it became a mistake.
Yeah.
You know? So it was quite challenging, and it actually did wonders for my technique. It really improved my thought to finger ratio.
Oh,
you know, I mean, I began to really live out my improvising in a strange sort of way, in a far more focused way than I had done with the Leslie, where I mean, it's a lovely effect, but it's quite easy to go up and hold a nice big chunky chord and turn the rotor on, you know, and that sounds pretty good, and then turn it off again, and then just change a couple of positions. Yeah. It's quite easy to get lazy.
Yes.
But this was a big challenge. But that's how I got the sound. And I stuck with it until really, until the band broke up.
It is great. You also, you're one of the first bands to really break Japan too, weren't you?
When we first went there, to Japan, Warner Brothers Japan said we would like you to record a live album here, and we were very suspicious of live albums. You know, I mean, didn't sort of seem like a brilliant idea, and so we said, well, in the end we succumbed, but we said because they were so nice. I mean, you know, Japanese people are so delightfully polite. Which in 1972 was like a breath of fresh air in the rock industry, to get people who were actually saying please. And we said, okay, only if it goes out just in Japan. And they said, of course, that's the deal. So we wanted to pay for it so that we could retain some sort of control over it. It cost us, I remember, $3,000, which was not huge amount, but it was not inconsiderable in 1972.
No.
And it was done on 2 linked 4-tracks. And we recorded 3 nights. We recorded 2 nights in Osaka at the festival hall, and 1 night in Tokyo at the Budokan. And we had this amazing engineer called Martin Birch, who did In Rock, Fireball, Machine Head. Who do you think we are? I mean, he's really almost
clever
like a
guy.
6th member of the band. You know? Wonderful, wonderful engineer and producer. And anyway, we were on fire for those 3 nights. The band was really, I suppose, on a graph, that would be where we peaked in terms of our ability to play amongst ourselves.
Yeah.
You know, and listening to each other, and call and response, and all that sort of thing. And when we heard it, we went, oh, that's pretty good. So it was released in Japan and went straight to #1, and the Warners people in California heard it, and they said, got to have that. So we went back on our worry about live albums and said, okay, it can go out worldwide. Well, it's done tens of millions now over the years.
I mean, do you think it had anything to do with the fact that it was Japan, it was new, it was a whole different environment, which is a great buzz when you go somewhere new to
absolutely
to play.
Yeah. I mean, do you find like playing in Japan did you find it at first a challenge because they keep so quiet and you weren't used to that?
The first time I went there, it was like we finished went there with Yes first of all about 72, and at the end of the piece it was almost like a second silence, and then they applaud, and then it stops.
Suddenly, yeah.
And you go, Maybe they don't like us as they were. I mean, they're a lot different now, but that's as they were.
But it was quite terrifying, wasn't it?
It was, because you thought, they don't like us.
Yeah. But that's what we felt, I think, at that time. So we went slightly inwards, and we knew we were being recorded, of course, as well. So you want to be good.
Yeah.
And I think we just called on some sort of inner thing that by that time we'd been playing such a lot. I mean, after Gillan and Glover joined in the middle of '69, we hardly stopped.
You were always a hard
and in fact, I don't think the band would have broken. I don't think that Ian Gillan would have left in '73, and that he and Richie would not have come to this antagonistic position that they got into.
Yeah.
And if we hadn't, if we'd taken some time off, we were good mates, but you know, even with good pals, living in the same.
Living in each other's pockets is very, very difficult. I often say there's not many jobs where you actually have breakfast together, travel together, rehearse together, lunch together, dinner together, and then you go and work together.
Absolutely.
The only time you don't see each other when you go to the bedroom.
And it requires a very special ability to forgive, I think.
Were you the mediator sometimes?
I think I tried to be until it just got too damn difficult. I mean, I wanted it to be. I wanted the world of the band, the internal world of the band, to be as good as the external world was with the onstage world, where we were, as I say, we were on fire.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it was creatively a great time.
Yeah.
And we discovered something about ourselves. We discovered something about where we thought rock music should be taken. You know, we loved the musicianship that was inherent in the band, and we loved using it as a way to get rock across, to keep improvisation in it. That's not so prevalent now in the band, I have to say. It's although it's still there, but it's not such a big deal. I mean, we would do half-hour improv. Well, I'm sure you did too. I mean, you know, it was the way. I mean, I'd come out of I'd played modern jazz while I was at college, you know, and I'd played R&B, so improvising was really 95% of it for me. And finding where you could take something and that glorious eureka moment when you know you've done a great solo.
Yeah.
You know, that's.
What was it? Sort of the different lifestyles and that, or of the actual people as against the music that came to that point where actually Purple sort of stopped for a little while, sort of broke up. Was that caused? Wasn't music? Was that musically, or was it just people wanting to thump each other?
Well, there's certainly some of that. I think the amount of work we were doing, I think, drove Ian Gillan slightly to distraction.
Yeah.
And he didn't believe that the band were firing on all 6 cylinders, or 5 cylinders, because of the amount of work we were doing. And he went to the management with his misgivings. We didn't know this at the time, and they told him to not be such a wuss and, you know,
get on with it,
you know. Whereas I think we all felt the same, and had we just spoken about it,
might have been
it might have been different. But then he decided to leave, which really pushed me. I mean, I wanted to call it a day because I thought we'd had the best of it. But the management came to us and said, "No, you come on, look." Because at the moment he left, we had, like, Smoke on the Water was in the top 10 in America as a single twice. The live version and the studio version were both in the top 10.
Wow.
Which was, like,
phenomenal.
Yeah, I mean, and he said, "You can't leave now." And I said, "It's not really just about that. It's about..." They said, "Why don't you look around for another singer?" And Roger had decided to call it quits as well, because he and Gillan are really
Great
close friends.
Yeah.
And that kind of pushed Richie to the fore as suddenly he became the man who made all the decisions. And I sort of abrogated that responsibility at that point, somewhat.
Yeah.
It had been going slightly that way anyway. So David Coverdale and Glenn Hughes came in. Great singer and great singer bass player. But it took the band off
in another direction,
which Richie didn't like after making 2 albums in that direction. And he went off and became what I suppose Purple might have gone towards, the kind of rainbow thing, the slightly more poppy, hard rock side of things. And I don't...
And then moved, of course, completely the other way, almost into new world music and various things.
What he is now there's no relation to what...
Absolutely none whatsoever. No. You mentioned going off to like Rainbow's more pop rock, shall we say, than it does. I've got to ask you, the Flower Pot Men.
Oh dear. I thought
I won't hang on to this too long, but I've got to ask you about.
I thought we swung past that. I thought I'd swerved that. It was 1967, the summer of love. If you remember.
It was a real psychedelic time of it.
And this was a kind of a Denmark Street group of session men who I knew because I'd been working. I'd left the Artwoods to do session work because it was more rewarding, and I wanted to be in London. I wanted to be part of all this that was suddenly going on. I felt there was a surge, that I wanted to be riding that particular wave, and so I was doing a bit of session work. And these session guys from Denmark Street had made a song called "Let's Go to San Francisco," written by a songwriting team called Carter and Lewis. I don't know if you remember. There was a band called Carter Lewis and the Southerners.
I don't remember the band. They wrote the guys, though, for the writers.
They wrote a lot of pop songs, big hits of the time. So here they were, these guys who had nothing to do with the hippie ethic at all, suddenly dressing in caftans and beads and bells and and going out as the Flower Pot Men. I don't know whether it was a kind of a sort of a postmodern joke. I'm not quite sure what it was, but anyway. But they needed a backing band, so this band had been put together, but the keyboard player wasn't quite working out. And somehow they said, do you fancy being part of this? Because the backing group is, you'll love this, the backing group was called The Garden. See, the Flower Pot Men and the Garden. But on drums was Carlo Little, one of the great early drummers.
Yeah.
Bass was Nick Simper. A guitarist was a guy called Jed something, who used to actually do quite a little bit of driving.
Right.
It's a side story, and he would, terrifying moments when he'd be driving, he'd go, "Oh man, I can't see." So, those terrifying days upon the old A roads. But anyway, so for 6 months of that year, I did, and because the Flower Pot Men, it never really travelled. I think we went once. We did a week in Munich, but in these clubs, we used to go to working men's clubs up and down the length and breadth of the north of England.
With the caftans and all the bits.
Yeah. But they said to me, we'd like you to be our musical director. So I said, well, which musical direction would you like to go in? And they paid me actually quite a lot of money for the time. And all I had to come up with was one vocal arrangement a week.
All right.
Which is actually quite a lot. And in fact, in the 6 months, I came up with one, which was a version of If I Were a Carpenter.
Right.
I found a different way of doing that, which they liked. But we were up in these clubs doing, I Who Have Nothing and, all this terrible cabaret stuff. And then suddenly they would do Let's Go to San Francisco. Before they went on, they wanted The Garden to go on and play and do 25 minutes. Well, The Garden, with Carlo Little, Nick Simper and me, was a nascent rock band.
Yeah.
And we were like, doing quite heavy stuff. So you get these pie and pint people, up in Tito's in Stockton, like, what the bloody hell, It was terrible.
Couldn't do it for too long, though, could you?
No.
Just going back before that, you've mentioned a couple of times the Artwoods, which is Ronnie's brother, wasn't it?
It was, yeah.
Yeah, and that band was together for quite some time. I mean,
I kind
probably deserved better recognition than it got, I think.
Yeah, in fact, now it's rather famed as a mod. People seem to think it was a mod band.
Right.
Because a couple of the guys in the band, not me, I hasten to add, although I tried, used to shop in Carnaby Street, and it was quite sort of modish. And so now people are, in fact, some magazine called Mojo magazine did a big thing saying, you know, that early Deep Purple was also looked quite modish, you know.
Yeah.
Whatever. I mean, I don't know about trends.
Is it Mr. Fish in Carnaby Street,
there you go.
wasn't it?
Mr. Fish.
He did all that. How many albums did the Artwoods do? 3, was it? 2 or 3?
No, we did one album, one EP. Do you remember those?
Yeah.
And several singles.
Right.
Pretty much all for Decca.
Was it frustration that it didn't get the successes that sort of pulled that band to pieces, was it?
It's pretty much what made me leave, was that it wasn't going quite where we thought it was. And then we moved from Decca to Pi at the early part of '67, and the big thing then was Gangsters. Do you remember Bonnie and Clyde had been... and so they renamed us the St. Valentine's Day Massacre and made us wear gangster suits. And that's when I said, goodbye.
I mean, there was always going to be a time for you to do other projects and others, just because of the nature of your music, really, and your diversity of the things that you do. And you've had some, apart from your solo stuff, which I want to talk about in a second, some great collaborations and involvement with people like our great mutual late friend Tony Ashton.
Dear Tony.
Yeah,
yes.
How did you and Tony first become sort of friends and musical friends as well?
We actually met at a place in Chester in about '66, I guess. I was in the Artwoods, and he was in a band called the Remo 4.
Oh, do you remember the name of the pub?
Well, it was actually the you might have played there. It was a club called Quaint Ways.
Oh, crikey, yeah.
Yeah, and and there were 2 rooms, if you remember. There was a kind of an R&B room, and then there was a sort of a more, I don't know... Cabaret-ish, yeah. And he was in the cabaret-ish room with a Liverpool singer, I think was it Tommy Quickly or something like that. Oh. And the Remo 4 were backing him anyway. And I'd got a Hammond and he'd got a Hammond. And we'd both seen ourselves helping to carry these beasts in.
Yeah.
And so we just got chatting. And then I never saw him again for a couple of years until Purple had by 69-ish, really sort of starting to do well. And one day in our office, there he was. And he'd been signed up by our management.
Oh, right.
And the first thing he did for them was the Resurrection Shuffle.
With Ashton, Gardner and Dye, yeah.
Yep.
But then you ended up, working together with Ian as well.
Well, we became really good buddies, and he and I, Ashton and I, did a solo album, a dual album, I don't know what you'd call it, together, called The First of the Big Bands, which we did it was guitar, bass, drums, organ, piano, a brass section, and 3 backing vocalists, and we did it all live in the studio because we thought that was a good idea. And engineers were going, well, why would you want to do that? We can actually overdub, Yeah, but we want that, We thought it was a good idea. And we actually recorded at Apple in Savile Row. That was a fun project. So as a result, when Pacey and I decided that Purple had come to its last legs in 76.
Yeah.
He and I sat down with Tony and said, should we try doing that big band rock thing again? Thus, Pace, Ash and Lord.
You did quite a lot of concerts with that, didn't you? Quite a lot of shows.
Yeah, we did a few, and then, but we discovered rather too late in the day, after spending an enormous amount of money making albums and stuff, making the album, and rehearsing and putting a band together and going on the road, that Dear Tony had the most enormous case of stage fright. He was utterly, utterly terrified of anything larger than a club.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yes, it was something to do with his, great love of the Scottish national drink, and he liked a glass of scotch, did Tony? As you well know.
Absolutely.
Having worked a TV show with him.
Absolutely, you did Gas Tank with him.
Yeah, marvellous man. My greatest friend ever.
A lovely man.
I loved him.
Sorely missed.
Yeah.
Somebody else who's sorely missed, who you work with, it's sometimes I'm bringing up every name who's no longer with us now. But not only did you live close to George Harrison, you worked with him too, didn't you?
Did a few things, yeah, a few bits and pieces on his, up in the studio at Friar Park.
Yeah.
It was the days of ending up at George's. You know, I mean, I met him actually doing that at Apple in Savile Row that I spoke about earlier.
Yeah.
That's the first time I met him, where he came and stood in front of me and said rather quizzically, "Oh, you look like me." And I went, because it was George Harrison.
Yeah.
I mean, well, I'm sorry.
I tried to look like
Paul. I tried to look different. Yes, I look like someone else. But you know, because that's the days of his beard and the moustache,
Yes.
which I had, and the long
That's it, yeah.
hair down at the shoulders kind of thing. But we became friends about a year later, mainly because of him living nearby. And again, I was very close, and I adored him. He was delightful, most delightful of men. Very sharp when angered, but generally, which surprisingly, you know, you would think George was the eternal hippie, really. And,
Yes.
But very, very, could be quite nasty when angered.
Really? When you went up there to work with him for the first time, I never worked with any of the guys, with George or any of the guys. Did you know what to expect when you went up there? Did he know what he wanted, or was it, please do what you want?
No, he didn't know what he wanted. But, or let me rephrase it. He knew what he wanted, but he didn't know how to tell you what it was that he wanted.
Okay.
He wanted you to show him
What
something.
he wanted.
Yes. I think that's why when he did that, All Things Must Pass, which, I mean, just think of all those great songs that must have been boiling up inside him, you know, for years, wanting to get them out and then being able to do so. But I think he surrounded himself with a lot of musicians who would always bring something to the table, you know, like Eric Clapton, of course, you know, and the producer, Spector, wasn't it, who produced it?
He did.
He likes to surround himself with people who would have ideas. Not that he would just use the ideas willy-nilly, but that he would recognise something in that idea that he wanted but couldn't express. But he always used to show me, if he wanted me to play the piano, he would show me, which was rather strange. You know, you ask a pianist friend to come along and then you show them what you want. Because he only used those three fingers to play the piano with. He just played triads.
Right.
You know, and these two fingers will remain tucked irrevocably under there. And he would say, that's sort of what I want. And you'd go, well, why don't you do it yourself? Because that was actually quite good.
Yes.
And he'd go, no, but you know, you'll give it something else. Sorry, excuse the dreadful Liverpool accent.
That was very good,
actually. You know, and he would, therefore, what he was trying to do is point you in the rough way.
In a direction to
but
where,
I thought he was an astonishingly good musician. I thought he had a way of looking at harmony and that was quite unusual. He's often overshadowed. People have said this before. It's not an original thought, but he was often overshadowed, I think, by Lennon and McCartney because they were so
prolific.
And so
it's true what you said. I mean, some of the melodies and the songs and the structures that he came out with when having that freedom on his own were actually
they were
classics.
I think they were brilliant.
You talked about George, obviously having stuff building up inside and he wanted to get out. You must have had the orchestra inside you wanting to come out, you know, because when you came involved with orchestrations in your own work with horrible expression, I was going to say duck to water, really, was it? Just because you knew what to do, you just went for it, you just loved it, didn't you?
Yeah, I was one of those lucky people, I think you're one too, that who views music really as one world. Obviously, many different countries in that world, but you can visit them, but they all belong in that same world. I've never seen division, really, between rock music and orchestral music or classical music, whatever you want to call it. I mean, if you like it, does it matter what the label around its neck is, you know? And I started at 5 or 6 years old playing the piano and was thus taken through to the age of 17 with a pretty darn good teacher who led me through all sorts of stuff to do with not just playing the piano, but understanding the theory of music, the history of music, like yada, 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 you know. And so by the time I first heard rock music, I adored classical music. But if you remember that shock of massive goosebump heaven that arrived when you first heard, I don't know, Little Richard or Elvis or whatever it might be, that my God, what is that? That's wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. But I was lucky enough, I think, to not have one shove the other out of the way. And so by the time I got to 1969 and I had this idea that I could perhaps put the two together, and that I was in a rock band that might be able to deal with it, and that I'd reached a point of my musical journey where I felt able to deal with the orchestration side of it, writing for the orchestra. I just went ahead and did it. And it's really, I suppose, from that moment, has pretty much defined me as a musician, what I believe in, what I like to do. And it's confused as many people as it's pleased, I think. I think a lot
Can you remember what it was like the very first time in the studio? There's the orchestra there, so you're going to hear it for the first time. Were you stick waving, or did somebody else? So you're up in the box or wherever or downstairs. From my own point, I just remember the first time that happened to me. There was a sort of whereas everything else you do is completely, total confidence. Suddenly there's a guy with a stick, and everybody's waiting. You've not heard it before, so it's this horrible cacophony of something going to come out, and basically you shit yourself almost.
Absolutely, yes.
I'm glad I'm not unique. It is, isn't it?
No, but because first read-throughs, I mean, in spite of the fact that British musicians are probably the best sight readers in the world.
Yes, I agree with you.
Followed swiftly by Americans. Yeah. But certainly English orchestral musicians are astounding sight readers. But even so, that first read-through is usually pretty hellish. Yeah. And you think, oh, what have I done?
Because they don't know the tempos, really. They don't know. They're looking more there than the conductor.
Right. And the conductor's going, no, come on, just keep going, And it was Malcolm Arnold who conducted the...
You're joking. Of course it was. Yeah, of course.
Later, Sir.
Yeah. And you don't go in the shallow end, do you?
No, bless him. But he changed my life by agreeing to conduct it. Because without me knowing it, my publisher had arranged a meeting with him. My publisher was a friend of his, and had arranged a meeting saying, Malcolm, I've got this long-haired layabout who thinks he can write for the orchestra, you know what I mean? And would you cast an eye over his score? And Malcolm had said, of course, that would be a pleasure. So they'd come to me and said, do you know who wants to meet you? Malcolm Arnold would like to, he's very interested in your project. I said, wow. He wants to see the score. Well, I'd orchestrated about the first 15 minutes of it, of a 50-minute piece. Yeah. But anyway, I took it along to this meeting and I wasn't aware that I was going to be vetted. And he, huge, jovial man, delightful fella, looked through it and said, oh, yes, this will work very well. Yes, no problem at all there. That's, yes, absolutely wonderful. Would you like me to conduct it? Thus changing my life, really, because had he not agreed to conduct it, I don't think it would have come off. I think the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra would have run screaming from the room the first time Richie played, the People's Key.
Yes.
But he held it together because of he loved rock. He loved Zeppelin, Floyd, us. That was his kind of.
It was a difficult time for orchestras as well, because orchestras really, they're much better now, as you know, because you work with them a lot. But you can read notes, but you can't read feel.
Absolutely.
And it was, they didn't really understand back then a lot, no. and to some extent vice versa, especially from guitar players and things, couldn't understand what was going on. So to have somebody like Malcolm Arnold there was kudos on both sides, wasn't there?
Yeah, well, they loved him. He had been...
Respect is
in fact, that's really all it's about, isn't it? In the end, if you respect another musician, even if you don't particularly like the genre that they exist in, but if you respect them and understand that they're going through just the same hell as you're going through, trying to learn something or trying to deal with, your life as a musician, so it is respect. And they respected Malcolm because he'd been an orchestral musician. He was principal trumpet player of the London Phil.
How you mentioned people like Richie coming in with the People's Score. It's a great expression. Yeah. And then, I'm sure because I had it as well. There must have been a few eyebrows raised certainly when Ian comes in and the whole band starts.
Yeah, and in fact, what I tried to do in the Concerto for Group and Orchestra is to actually write that surprise in, because if you remember, it starts with about 6 minutes of orchestra.
Yes, yeah.
With the band sitting patiently, by, and the orchestra kind of like does all sorts of orchestral things. There's big climaxes, there's fanfares, there's trumpet things, and then suddenly they grab hold of this rather silly little tune, which I wrote on purpose as a silly little tune.
It's a great melody. It's not a silly tune.
Well, but it's rather this jaunty. It's like something the paperboy might whistle, And then they get away with it, so they take it up a third and sort of get going, and then that's when the band goes bang bang bang, and in the score, then all the woodwind run away, and off.
Yeah.
So I was trying to see what would happen before it actually happened and write it into the music. That whole first movement is my prevision of the battle that actually did take place.
Did it, when you first heard it, did it sound exactly like you'd heard it in your head? Or whether a few spoke, oh, that works better than I thought, that would...
Absolutely. Yeah, that works better than I thought, and then other bits that, that doesn't work as well as I thought it would. There were a few of those, which, when 30 years later I was given the opportunity to do it again, I put them right, those bits. There was one wonderful moment when the principal cello, whose name I've forgotten, came up to me and sort of looked around before, with the score, Mr. Lord, this bar here, we can't play that. And I went, oh, God, I'm sorry. He said, no, it's just... He said, may I suggest, if you just alter that one note, then we can play. But he could have easily done that in front of the whole orchestra.
Nice, yes.
He could have said, bar 57, no way. But he didn't. He came up to me.
Well, that's respect to you.
Well, it was.
It's rather
nice.
Nice.
Yes, and I have to say that after the initial surprise that the orchestra went through, it was the Royal Philharmonic, damn it. I mean, they were a very established,
absolutely,
sort of very, patrician sort of orchestra. Most of them came to play. Some of them just didn't bother. I have to say that too. But it was 1969, and the world is a different place now. I mean, orchestras are much more... And
they feel it, they understand it. And
but you were so right about that feel thing.
How did the guys in Purple feel about doing stuff with an orchestra? How were they about it?
Well, it's gone down in history, in Purple history, that they hated it. Because somebody, early 70s, I think Richie or Ian Gillan, was doing a particularly grumpy interview with the New Musical Express or something and said, oh, that's just John and his classical crap, Oh, I see. So you didn't enjoy it? No, it was... But actually, they did enjoy it, and they've both put the record straight since, I have to say. It was an astonishing evening, and really one of those evenings that, if you live to be 150, you'll remember... when you're sitting in front of the fire, nodding gently, I shall remember that. It was great.
I mean, you've done a lot of stuff with orchestra and things. You like orchestrating, you enjoy doing it.
It's my passion now, I must admit. I mean, I love standing in front of a huge piece of furniture, which you and I would call a Hammond organ, and giving it some welly. I adore playing R&B or rock on the Hammond organ. I love it. But I love playing piano with an orchestra. That fills up another part of me.
And you do a lot of shows with that now, too.
Yeah, I'm starting to do even more now. I'm doing something like 20 this year, and
wow, that's a lot.
We're already up to 15 or 20 next year. So, it's a great place to be.
And you still enjoy composing for orchestra and
yeah, and when I'm at home and just you know this feeling of sitting in the music room when something good comes along. Because ideas, they go by, and if you don't stop them and haul them back in, they don't come back, do they?
No.
The good ideas.
They don't.
You've got to get them in and get them on the paper or into a record or whatever, however you choose to do it.
It's just a couple of other things I want to ask you. One is, in the early days, did you nearly become an actor?
Yes.
Yes,
I nearly became an actor. I liked it.
Well, I'm sorry, I don't know whether you did, actually.
Yes, were you nearly an actor?
I'm sorry.
Which part of you wasn't?
Sorry, that sounds incredibly rude. I didn't mean it like that.
I did 3 years at drama school. It was actually my ticket out of Leicester, where I was born,
right,
to London. I needed to get out of Leicester at the age of 18, 19, whatever it was.
Months?
Yes, yeah, that's right. Yes, nothing would have been too early. It wasn't actually. No, Leicester in the 50s and 60s was not a bad town. I have no idea what it's like now. I haven't been back properly for yonks. But I was doing quite a lot of amateur dramatics, and a mate of mine, by again that wonderful bit of happenstance that sometimes happens, was a mate of mine had a girlfriend who was at the Central School of Speech and Drama in London. And she came along to see a play I was in Leicester at the local little theatre. She came up to me afterwards and said, you're a pretty good actor. You should try out for drama school. Really? Of course, that was it. I mean, a young, very good-looking girl who was at drama school had told me that I ought to go to drama school.
You went?
No contest, mate. So I went. Took an audition, and I got in, much to my surprise. And also, much to my surprise, I got a grant.
Wow. Did you do any professional acting at all?
I carried a spear a couple of times. I think I did once, Lo, the King Approacheth. That was about and I was going, Lo, the King Approacheth. Lo, the King Approacheth. And they go, just say the line, dear. But I was... starving, basically, quite successfully.
A proper actor, then.
A proper actor, yeah. Can do that. And so I took to the only other thing I knew how to do, which is play the piano, to earn a bit of money, to keep the wolf from the door. And as a result, I met the guitarist of the Artwoods.
And that's how
I became a musician, yeah. Or I became a professional.
My final thing, and this is really for my own, but I'm not sure who else this will interest. I have an old, it's a Seaberg jukebox at home, which sits in my office, and I've got my favourite selection of old singles and things on it, and I've got one on there, which is a Deep Purple single called Emarita.
Oh my gosh! Yeah.
Now I heard that Emarita, which is Emarita, did you get my letter?
Yeah.
That it was actually. The lady or god did exist.
Yes.
And I've always wanted to know how that, because it's not a very well-known single, is it, of
no.
Purple at all? But I love it. I think it's a great single. And
thank you.
I just wonder if you could just, for my own benefit, so that I've got a little thing where somebody comes and says, who's that? Oh, that's Purple Emarita. Do you know how that came up?
It was a girl. She was a black girl and she was in Hair in New York, or had been in Hair in New York.
Right.
The musical, I hasten to clarify. And I had met her at a do that we were invited to, and she was, astonishingly attractive. And, to me, it was on only our second trip to America. So here was this sort of young Leicester lad, like suddenly in the land of the brave and the free, and the land of very, very beautiful women, sitting talking to this rather gorgeous woman, only to be blown out by Rod Evans, who was, far more cool and handsome than I could possibly ever.
Bloody singers.
Oh, yes, bastards. But anyway, and he had an affair with her, so that when Richie came up with that, and Rod came up with the idea to write about this girl, but that was her name. She was. I don't know what her surname is, and I don't know where she is, and I don't know whether she's even aware that she had a single written about her, but a song written about her.
It was just one of those singles that sort of came and went, and I heard it.
It was again. We'd sat in a studio in New York trying to write a single, and we'd been given. Just very quickly, I'll tell you this: we'd been given 2 unreleased tracks by our record company. One was a Neil Diamond song called Glory Road, and the other was Lay Lady Lay Bob Dylan,
Oh,
which Bob hadn't released yet.
Yeah.
But had agreed, I don't know why, to this guy who knew him well, to let us have a go at. And we spent a whole day trying to find out a way of doing these 2 songs in a studio in New York. To the point at one point, I actually got a phone call from Neil Diamond, who was at that time more of a journeyman songwriter than the big star he became, you know. Because we'd done one of his songs, we'd done Kentucky Woman.
Yeah.
And so I'd called the record company saying, we're having no luck with the Neil Diamond song. I can't work out how we might do it. So he called up, and I had on the phone in the studio. He says, try it a bit faster. Sorry? Yeah. Change the G to an F. No, yeah, okay. But it still didn't work. So we ended up writing our own, and that was Emarita.
Emarita. Well, I'll tell you what, when I get home today, I'm going to go straight into my music room. I'm going to put that on.
Put it on and imagine a gorgeous New York black girl from Hair. Or not, as the case may be.
On that note, John, can I say thank you so much indeed.
Great pleasure, Rick. I thoroughly enjoyed myself.
Brilliant.